Yes, I'm still waiting for YouTube. Doop-boo-boo. Let's go live. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Oh, we're live. There we go. And thank you very much for joining me. My name is John Stevenson, and this is Practicalli Clojure. Today, we're going to continue our exploration of the Clojure command line tools, which are a new way to build and work with your projects in a very simple way that's very close to the underlying Java virtual machine, but it is very flexible and flexible enough to allow you to create different workflows and different builds, so you can be quite quite creative in how you actually work with Clojure as well. And they are quite simple as well, so it's a very simple way to get yourself and other people involved in doing Clojure work. So let's switch over to this. So we're going to follow this guide. The guide is, I've just published this morning, so it's brand new, so there might be some bugs in it, but let's hope there isn't too many. And as usual, all the information about Practicalli and all the study group videos are all linked off practicalli.github.io, or you can just go to practical.li, and you can find the study group books, the books I'm working on at the moment. Most of these are work in progress, but there is plenty of interesting stuff in there as well. And if you want to reach out and get in touch with me, then feel free to do that via the Clojure in Slack community. I'm using several channels of that. And if you want to support, then I'm doing a ride across Britain, which will be like 9 days, like 1,000 miles in 9 days. If I get enough money, I'll go do it on a Brompton. Otherwise, I shall just do it on my normal road bike. And I think I'm about halfway through my target. Oops. And so I'm getting close there. So if you are able to support me in that, that'll be much appreciated. I'm raising money for a charity called the Prince's Trust, which is supporting the 45% of the way there. That's good. So the Prince's Trust is an organisation that helps the youth of the UK to get back into education, to kind of catch up on things that they missed out. They didn't get the opportunities in life for whatever reasons when they were younger, so it helps them get jobs, education, and it helps them create a brighter future for themselves as well. So it's a very worthwhile charity, and you get to decide which bike I ride on. So thank you for any support. Thank you for everybody who's already donated, and hopefully I shall reach my target by the end of end of August, actually. Oh yes, because the ride's in September. Cool. Okay, there's a quick plug. So let's get back onto the content. So if you go to JRocket with a 0.co.uk, it's the latest blog post on there, so it's the one at the top. Yes, and then there's previous articles we've done from the previous broadcast as well. And there's also a way to, there's a little kind of tip if you want to run CLI projects from Spacemacs. There's a little guide on how to do that as well. It's mainly just to set the alias when you're actually running the cider jacking from cider. Okay, let's look at today's content. Everything is working. No questions so far. Hopefully everybody can hear me. The volume's working this time. Great. So so there's so this is essentially, we're gonna look at actually using the CLI tools in a project. We've looked at the options last time, some of the different options we can do. So this time we're actually going to create a project, work with that, and show the different workflows through that, and also play around and experiment and see if we can refine some of the workflows that are already there as well. So one of the things we can do is use this clj-new library, and this will create a project for us. If you're familiar with Leiningen or Boot, then you've probably seen yeah, you can use templates with them, and you can actually use the templates from Leiningen and Boot with clj-new. Although if those projects don't, this is one thing I didn't really understand at first. This tool is not designed to create a deps.eden configuration file. If that template that you're using doesn't generate a deps.eden file, then clj-new itself won't create it for you. But even if you're using a Leiningen or Boot template that doesn't generate a deps.eden file, then it's very easy to just create your own. Just take the project one. So for example, if we go into projects, and I'm going to create, let's do a Clojure. I'll actually just go into Clojure CLI. I'm going to create, I've got some projects in there already, so I could create a new one. I could do Clojure, and then I've got an alias already set up called new, and that's going to call clj-new. And then I can use a template. Let's see, a classic one is Composure, and then I can create a name. What's the name for my website? So, or the project I'm building. So I'm going to build it. I'm going to build it for Practicalli, which is my GitHub organization. So I'm going to call it Practicalli, and then I can then give it a name of the actual project itself. So let's call it my website for want of a better name. So I can either do that, or and that will create a project for us using Composure is a Leiningen template, and this will then go off, download a few files from the internet, because I haven't done this on this computer, I don't think, before. So it might download a few dependencies. Here we go. Hopefully it's not too many. And then it's the output from, oh, did I do it? Oh, it already exists. There we go. Let's try that again. There we go. And then, yep, we go. And it should take just a few seconds to happen, I think. And there we go. Yes, there we go. And if we look at that, so we've got my Composure website. And if we look at that Composure website, yeah. So you can see it's created a project, and this is a perfectly normal Leiningen project, but it hasn't created a deps.eden. If we look in the project clj file, we could actually, it's a fairly simple project file. It does have a it does have a ring handler, which we might need to do something about defining, but all the dependencies and so on, we could easily include that in the in a deps.eden file, so it wouldn't be too difficult to install it. Ideally, you would look for templates that generate a deps.eden file for you, and then you wouldn't need to do any translating. And you can also create your own clj-new templates as well, if you can't find a template that you need to. And if you really can't find a template, it's pretty easy just to create all the deps.eden stuff by hand anyway. It's mainly the dependencies. Okay. So let's come out of that for a second. And where is the website? There we go. So we can, so we can create projects from templates. We just need to be aware of which templates we want to use. So for this broadcast, I'm going to create a figwheel-main. I'm going to use figwheel-main template. Figwheel-main is kind of like the de facto tool that people use for new ClojureScript projects, especially ClojureScript sort of web applications as well. And because it manages all the reloading of your code and gives you a really nice interactive experience when you're developing. As you're writing code, you can see the changes happening live inside the website. So it's a really great tool for doing that. And we're going to just create a project with that. So let's just copy that. And let's see. Yeah, we're in the right directory, so we can just paste that in there. So we're calling Clojure. We're using the alias new, which is going to call Clojure CLJ, or clj-new, sorry. And then it's going to use a figwheel-main template. It's going to call the project, let's call that something else. Let's call it Practicalli Hello World. So you can do this two ways. The naming structure, it can either be what's called a multi-segment. So I can do Practicalli dot, which is the kind of again, Practicalli is the domain, that might be your overall kind of GitHub organization, or it might be your GitHub account, or it could be a company, it could be com.acme in there as well, and it will create the namespace to include that. Or you can also do the slash, which I think makes it kind of easier to demarcate the domain with the project name. So if we create that, assuming we don't have Hello World already, I didn't check. Oh, we've got Hello World core, so this should create a folder called Hello World, and it should have a namespace of Practicalli Hello World. And it's getting the templates, it's downloading some data from the internet because I haven't done a figwheel-main project before, and it's built it, and it's also telling me how to generate. It's telling me it's generating a figwheel-main project and how to get started and how to run a simple build. So we're going to do that, and we do some more stuff there as well. So if we have a look, we've got Hello World. The Hello World core is one I did earlier, I think. Yes. And so if we look at the contents of this, so we've got a depth Eden file, which is our main configuration file. We've got several other Eden files here as well. So we've got this dev.cljs.eden file. So this is for a specific development build, any extra things we want to add there. We've got a configuration specifically for controlling how Figwheel itself works. And then we've just got the usual kind of files. We've got the README, resources, source, and test. And the target is where we're actually going to generate the output of compiling and running and compiling our code. And you can see because we call this Practicalli Hello World, then the namespace is Practicalli, and then the file with all the code in is Hello World for that particular namespace, and the same thing with that. And the template also adds this test runner as well, just to be able to do some one-off testing, and we'll see that. And there's also a test configuration file to control how we run those testing. So we're going to look through all of those during the broadcast. Okay. Any questions? The audio is very good. Okay, thank you. So we created a project very similar to this. so we've got this deps.eden file, yeah, it's fairly straightforward. It might look a little bit complicated when you first look at this, but it's fairly straightforward. We've got the dependencies, we've got the paths that it's going to look at for source code, and we've got some aliases that define some additional dependencies. And those are the dependencies we don't really want to include in the final build. Those are the dependencies we're only going to use for particular development and testing workflows. And so we've got a few of those. We've got fig, and fig is basically adding this figwheel-main library and the rebel readline. So you can see we've got two libraries that we're adding here as extra dependencies. So that's the name of it. It's a rebel readline CLJS. Because it's a ClojureScript project, and we've also got figwheel-main, and they're both just defining the versions of each of those libraries. And these are extra deps that we're adding when we use the fig alias. So if we call Clojure with this project, but we don't include the fig alias, then it won't be able to find rebel readline or figwheel. But if we include fig in as part of the alias, then it should be able to find them. It will be able to find them and be able to call them as well. And in this case, we've actually separated out how to actually run figwheel into several different aliases as well. So we've got a build, a main, and a test alias. And this allows us to do different things because and the reason I chose this was it's quite a nice way to show the different differences between builds. So ClojureScript, if you're not familiar with it, when we just build our project for development, then what it's doing is it's creating a whole number of little JavaScript files that it can individually reload, and that makes it much more efficient as you're developing to just reload a little part of the change that you're making. But when you actually come to deploy an application, you want just a single JavaScript file, because ClojureScript is going to be compiled or transpiled into JavaScript, so it can run inside the browser. And to be able to do it efficiently, especially when you don't want to download hundreds of different files over the internet, because each of those would require a connection, and that would slow the whole process down. So you have a single JavaScript file that you include, and then that has your entire application in, and that's much more efficient to use in a production environment. And we also minify it and do some advanced compilation and delete any code that we don't actually use. So it does create a very small single JavaScript file that we can just download from our and run our application from. So that's so the fig is adding our dependencies, and then we can specify. So we're always going to specify fig if we want this to work properly, and then we can also specify like one of either build, which just builds it for during the development. We can specify like min, which is what we'd be using for deployment. And then if we just want a one-off test, we just want to run the test runner, we might want to do this. So this might be more useful actually for continuous integration. So rather than the developer doing it, because it just basically runs the tests once. We also see that build also has a continual testing thing. We'll have a look at that as well. And you can add as many of these aliases to control the workflow that you want to establish, and so you can build up a potentially quite intricate workflow, but from just very simple aliases out there as well. And it does help to kind of manage the complexity of a build in itself. So okay, let's see, no questions so far. Let's get back to running figwheel. So we can run figwheel. We can run it with or without a build. If we don't run it with a build, then we'll just get, we won't actually get the our application itself. So if we just run with the alias fig, that will pick up the dependencies which we need, because otherwise if we try to do this without fig, we're going to get an error because it's not going to be able to find figwheel-main. So we should get an error here saying, oh, I don't know what you mean, I can't load anything. Just give it a second. There we go. So it basically can't find figwheel-main because we haven't told it to include those libraries. So that's correct. So if you put, so we need to have, the A to define which aliases we want to include, and then you just have whichever aliases you want in there. So we're just using one, we're just using fig, and then we're just specifying the main namespace to use. And we want to drive the whole thing from figwheel. So if we run that, that's basically going to start. It's going to start figwheel, and it's going to use figwheel-main as the main namespace and call the functions from there. And this should start up a web page. Hopefully it starts up in the right browser. I've got several open. And it's probably a little bit slow because I am broadcasting off the same machine as well. But if we give it a second. Okay, so this is if you've used Figwheel, even if you use the previous version of Figwheel, this kind of output is pretty much the same. So we just validated the configuration file is okay. So we validated that this figwheel-main is correct, and that's again one of the advantages of using Eden. It's very easy to validate all your configuration files because they're all a Clojure data structure, or all a Clojure map. Oh, there we go. And so this brings up this kind of generic page, and it shows that we're connected. Yay! So if you are having problems with running your application, your Figwheel, your ClojureScript application, and it's using Figwheel, you can actually just run this command. You just run this -m figwheel-main, and this will just run Figwheel itself, and we can kind of see if that part is working, if everything is working okay with the basic structure of our program, of our tooling, sorry, and it also gives you kind of it does, so it's built Figwheel default REPL build. So this is just building Figwheel, essentially building Figwheel with a little example ClojureScript project, which will just open that web page. And then it's starting a server to listen to. So it's basically starting a browser, and it's going to start the REPL, and then it's going to connect the ClojureScript REPL with the JavaScript REPL in the browser, and then whenever you do any evaluate any code, it sends that to the browser for you, and you see the result. And you can see that what this is also doing is it also picks up Rebel readline as well. So I can do, if I start doing, if I start typing in some Clojure, it's doing some syntax highlighting for me, and it's also giving me hints about what the signature of a function call is going to be. So here we're going to use the map function, and it's telling me the different arguments I could use to successfully call map. So it takes a function or a function with a collection. So I can do a function called inc, and then I give it a collection, which is 2, 4, 6, 8, and close that there, and it's showing me the matching brackets. was that there? And then we can just execute it, and it gives us the answers right there in the REPL. And we can also do some interactive stuff with the browser. So we do alert. So we do JS alert. So JS as a prefix is kind of the JavaScript interoperability. So we can actually call functions from JavaScript by putting JS in front of it. So in this case, it's going to call the alert function from JavaScript itself. And we can give it an argument of hello from the command line. And that will hopefully, oh, did I? Oops, I broke it. Oh, there we go. That's cool. So obviously I did that on purpose so I could show you how to edit the line. I missed my closing double quote. But you can see it's because I'm using Rebel readline, then it allows me to go and fix things quite nicely. So I just press backspace and it allowed me to fix that. So if I press it now, and then we can see it's running a bit of code inside the ClojureScript REPL, which then sends the JavaScript to the browser and displays this little pop-up. There we go. So that's all pretty cool. So it's all, if you've used Figwheel before, then it is kind of this part of the workflow is just the same. I think it's probably slightly easier. You've got a lot less configuration in there. So usually aligning a project has a lot more configuration to deal with, whereas this is quite a simple thing. And then we can also do REPL help. And we get help from the REPL. We can set key bindings if we wanted, like Vim key bindings or Emacs key bindings. We could do that as well. I think, oh yes, I've got Emacs key bindings at the moment. I might change those to Vim. And it gives you, the key bindings for like doing things like evaluating points and getting apropos. If you want documentation, if you want to get the source of a particular function, you can do that as well. So actually, I mean, you don't, for doing some basic Clojure development, you don't actually need to have a development tool, an editor. You can actually just start doing things, start playing around very quickly in here. Obviously, the more code you're writing, then obviously you want to save that into a file at some point. But this allows you to get going very, very quickly without having to set up too much stuff there as well. So let's just CLJS quit out of that, and that closes that first down. Go back to here. So that's very good. So we've closed the REPL, and you can see that now we don't have that connected sign anymore. So this is a nice kind of way to feedback to see whether something is actually running or not in your application. Obviously, so if you do have issues, then it's nice to go and jump back to this as well. But obviously, we want to actually run our application, and there is code in the template that we use. There's code to build. There's code to build. We build our application. So we've got a question: how to call other JS functions which are not global in the scope. If you want to use other JavaScript stuff, if you're going to use a library, then I'd recommend using something called CLJS, which will help you bring in libraries, and you can just include them as a dependency and provide an alias just like you would normally do. You can do things like include React. I mean, if you didn't want to use reagent or reframe, you could use React. And as an example, you just add a normal dependency so in your deps.eden file, and then you would just require it in there, and you can just call it using the JS prefix in there as well. And so there's quite a lot of libraries here already. So this is already done for you. So this is one of the advantages of using this CLJS is it also it basically provides the externs, so it makes sure that even when you do advanced compilation, it should still all work. Yeah, so there's quite a lot of different libraries you can use in here. So that would be my first call of let's see if that's in there, and I think you can just do an import. Yeah, I'm pretty sure you can just do kind of something like an interrupt in there, but it's been a while since I did that. But yeah, I'll put some links about how to do the interrupt later on. Yeah, but there is some kind of anything that's part of like kind of the general JavaScript libraries available, but I don't know about specific ones. I'd have to Google on that one. But there is if you go to ClojureScript, if I spell that right. If you go to clojscript.org, there's probably a whole bunch of guides about how to do ClojureScript and yeah, namespaces and so on. So probably in that. Maybe. I'm not entirely sure what I'm looking for. I don't do a huge amount of front-end development yet, but I'm working on it. So, yeah. If not, there's also the ClojureScript channel in the Clojure and Slack community as well. Cool. Okay, so I think that partially answers your question. If I can find any more, I'll put some in the notes in the broadcast as well. Okay, so we can see that we can run figwheel by itself. So actually, let's go and run figwheel and actually run our application. That'll be quite nice. So we can use one of the aliases, the alias called build, to run that. So back here, we're still in our project, and we So if it's JavaScript, so the question would it be JavaScript JS/math round? Yeah, you should be able to do most of those things. I would have thought. Anything that's kind of generally just part of the JavaScript language, you can do very easily just by putting JS in the front. It works. Cool. Okay, so how do we run this application? So previously we ran it by specifying the main namespace. We don't actually need to do that. We can actually just use the build configuration, and that will run our application. And if we go and look at our build, this is from a different project, but it's the same template I use. So the build is basically actually just setting the same options. Oops, I don't want to do that. Setting the same options. So we've got so we're setting the main namespace figwheel-main, so we can actually run figwheel, and we're setting a build called dev, and the -r is also to run a REPL. So that was we saw that option in the previous broadcast. And we'll look at the dev profile quite soon. It doesn't really add anything too much extra there, but we'll have a look at that and see what it does. Hopefully that's our project. What's it doing? Oh, and so this time it's compiling our our dev build to this target. So if we go and look in target public CLJS out, it's going to create this dev main JS, and then it loads our application. Woohoo! Hello world. And we can go in, and if we go and edit this in our file, so if we just do open our file, let's go back up a level, and let's go to so Clojure, there we go, hello world. And if we go into the source file and Practicalli and hello world, we can see that, oh, there we go. If we look at this, so this is basically, I'm not going into this too much, but basically is using reagent to render a component, to basically draw a component onto the web page, onto the application, and a component is just a Clojure function. So this hello world here in this vector is actually a managed call. So reagent will call the hello world function when it thinks it needs to do so. So when it detects a change, so if we can edit this in the there we go. So if we save that, and then if we go back to our web page, it's changed. It works. There we go. Cool. So normally I would put these when I'm developing. I'd have like either two screens, or I'd put the source code. Oh, I don't know what there we go. I'd put the source code and the browser side by side, so you can actually see it happening in real time as well. So that's our application running. And if we go and look at the Depths Eden file again. So we're running Fig, so it's including these dependencies, and it's also setting these extra paths as well. So it's also setting target. So we're actually going to pick up the compile files from inside target, so it's going to look inside there, and it's also setting up test by default as a path as well, because we don't have that in our main path, and we don't want that in our application. We're not going to run our tests continually during when we've got it when we've got our application deployed live. So we only need tests for our aliases, for our figwheel aliases, and all our different builds. And so we're running this build thing, which is setting the main figwheel and this dev profile. So if we actually go and look at that, there is a file that starts with dev. So it's a dev CLJS Eden file. Again, it's another Eden file. So this is another configuration that will be merged into our Depths Eden file from the project, which is merged into our Depths Eden file from our application, from our user account. And what's this doing? It's adding some directories to watch. So it's watching test and source. And so if there's a change to the code in the source tree or the test tree, then it's going to rebuild. So that's, you saw that happening straight away. When we changed the source code, you saw that being updated into the browser, and the same thing would happen with tests as well. And because it's a web page, we're also going to monitor the cascading style sheets, and it's also running auto testing true, and we're setting the main namespace for our application. So this tells Figwheel what to actually run for our application. Once Figwheel itself is running, it will then run our application. And this is the main namespace for our application, which is what we defined when we created the project in the first place. Okie dokie. Any questions? Nope. Cool. Okay, let's go back to this. And you can see, so we've got this. This is the host page that was already there, and you can see it's already connected. And here is the kind of the new. Here's the one running our application, and we can also we can edit it. So we've seen we've edited it when we're changing it. Let's make that bigger again. And we can get on, and we can kind of we can play around with doing it. So when we've seen that running the let's just go to so we've seen that running this Clojure fig build, so running these two aliases together is kind of the same as just calling our application. So we could do this on the same thing. So we could do Clojure figwheel and use the dev build, because we're setting the main namespace of our application in the dev build there and telling it to run a REPL. So this is kind of like, we can do fig build, or we can do this Clojure fig and then set the figwheel-main as the namespace to kickstart figwheel, and then use the build dev to tell figwheel where our application is and start a REPL. So aliases do help like streamline like the actual specific commands you need to run, because you can kind of boilerplate all the build stuff in underneath an alias and just run that, and just include that alias when you're running Clojure. So we can run tests as well. Let's have a look at running tests. So if we go back to the command line, that's my editor, sorry. Shift tab. So we're still in the same project, so we can do Clojure and we still need to type fig for the dependencies, because we still need those libraries there. But this time, rather than build, we're going to use test, and this would start the test runner. So this is something you would probably call from your build tool or your continuous integration server, or maybe just like before, if you wanted a quick sanity check before you actually pushed your commits to a shared repository, or even before you did a commit, you can run all the tests, and this will give you just the results on the command line about what's actually passed. It does need to start up a browser to be able to run those tests. So it is going through the normal kind of build process. If we look at the if we look at the actual thing, what it's doing, so it is it's calling figwheel-main as the main namespace, and we're going to use this test.clj-eden configuration, and we're going to set the test runner as the main namespace, so it can actually run the test runner. And if we look at the test.clj, again, this is just setting the namespace here. It's opening. Oh, you can set up your own web address as well. So if you're running multiple projects on the same machine, you can have different ports and different host names and so on. This might be useful again for continuous integration. So there isn't a huge amount of stuff in there, but if we go back to, the command line, that's not. Oh, is that because I've still got that other thing running? Oops. Oh yeah, I've got bind. Yes, it's because I'm still running the REPL. That's why it failed. Oops. Yes. So it's using the same port. So I'd need to change the port because the build I'm running on the other one. So I'm still running the build, the build called build, and so it's using the ports that the test is trying to use. So you would use the test.cljs.eden to configure different ports to run the tests on. But you would get output that is similar to this. You get the testing output from there, and you would run your tests, and it was just like running a test runner on the command line. So like the Cognitech test runner we've got, or running EF test, or one of the many test runners that are out there as well. And what's probably nicer actually, because we're running the figwheel build, we can actually do this. We can actually look at the auto testing website output. So if we look at that, this should be running, and we can see. We can see that we get a nice kind of visual way to see that the tests are actually running and which ones have passed. And we can also hide, if we just want to see the tests that have failed, we can just hide all the passing tests. Obviously, all my tests pass first time. Okay, what have I done here? Let's kill that. So if we open our test, Practicalli, and if we open our namespace, so this is just a Practicalli Hello World namespace, but we add the -test at the end of the namespace, just to also as convention, just to help the test runner find it. And we've just got a couple of tests in here. We could do another one here, and we could do if we purposely, we'd have to change that. Yes, so our tests want to be called something different, otherwise it would just, one test would overwrite the definition of another test when it ran. And we can see already, so without having to do anything, with only just saving the test, then we can see it's failed, and yeah, we can see that the results of multiplying 75 by 100 is not the same as multiplying 75 by 10. Yes, well, that should be fairly obvious. But just to show you that it's the kind of the interactive nature of this testing as well. So that's all running part of the build. That's essentially part of figwheel-main itself as well. So there isn't really any extra configuration you need to do for that, except for if we go back to dev, I think there was just that one option. Yeah, because this is one option of auto testing set to true. So this just tells Figwheel to actually go in and run auto testing when you're doing a build. So if you didn't want that, you could just remove that line or set this to false in the dev build, and then when you are and then if you removed that auto testing from this dev profile, then when you did the build, then it wouldn't run auto testing. So you could kind of run your own test suite. You could run the test runner on the same machine without kind of without it colliding with ports and so on. So you could just have a build. You could have a build tests and build no tests on there as well. So you could just change. You just create a new dev profile or different profile dev tests there, just to make it more explicit about what it's doing. And yeah, cool. No other questions so far. So if you don't have any tests, then I think this auto testing is main page will show. You might see this briefly happening. If you've got a lot of tests that it needs to run through, you might see this default page before you actually see the results of the test. And it's got some links to documentation and so on as well. And then I haven't actually gone through this, but we'll just briefly cover the deployment, because it's one of the things I do is deploy the ClojureScript applications on GitHub using GitHub pages, and that way, because we're just serving it from static files, even though it's a dynamic application because of JavaScript, we're just serving it from static files, so we can use GitHub pages. Because this will just serve up HTML and CSS and JavaScript on there as well, and create a nice little website. This is what the Practicalli website does. This is just static files, but it's an interactive, hopefully more interactive soon website, and it just provides a very easy way to get your application deployed. So if we look at the here, so we can already do. So this is what it's kind of. These are all the files it's creating. If you go and look in public. So in fact, if we go and look in public now, let's just quit out of this. Just quit for now. So if we do tree here, which will just show all the files. There's a lot more files in there than there used to be, because it does create all these kind of little pieces of files, little pieces of JavaScript and JSON, because it's using React, which is a fairly large library, so it does include an awful lot of files in there. And so while you're developing, you have all these kind of individual files, and you can just reload any particular changes that you're doing into the browser as and when you're using them, which is much more efficient. But you don't want all these files when you want to actually deploy something. So that's when we come to the min. We can use this min alias, and this is going to use advanced compilation and just create a single JavaScript file for us. But it's going to create it in the same directory, because it's still using the dev build. And what we could do is actually create a new alias called deploy, and we could put that into our we could basically change the directory that it generates our file in. Let's just see. Did I have an example here? Let's go see. Let's go back to here. So what we can do, what it says in here is just to basically just delete everything from target public, because we're just generating that. So there's no problem kind of generating that. So if we go and do that for a start. Paste that in. So this is just going to remove everything from public. And you can see our tree is much tidier now. So we've still got our resources public, which is where this kind of source of the index HTML and like style CSS that our application is going to use. That's still there. We haven't deleted it. It's just everything under target has gone. And then if we do the, there's quite a few different optimizations we can do. So here where we could calling Clojure, calling figwheel-main as the main namespace, and we're just going to optimize for white space and build once. I think that'll be, and then we just put hello world on the end of that. I think that should be it. Oops, did I? That didn't build. Is it there? Let's do that. Oh, yes, sorry, yes. Oops, Well, did you spot what I missed? You can't find figwheel-main because I didn't provide the alias. So I can do alias of fig, and that should build it now, hopefully. That's looking more promising. Oh, it doesn't like the. Oh, okay. Oops. Oh, sorry. Yes, it should. It's using the. We're not using hello world. We're building one, so we need to specify a build, not the actual namespace. So if we do dev. Oh, actually. We do min. Let's try that. As you can see from the blog, I didn't quite get to this part in time, unfortunately. But it's pretty quick to do this. So there is a build called min, which will also minify. So it'll actually do more than just the white space. So it'll override that. What is it doing? Oh, okay, right. Okay, div. I'm pretty sure this will work now. I might edit that bit out in the post processing of the video. It's a little bit slow on my machine. It's quite an old machine. Oh, there we go. Cool. So we're now compiling. We've validated the figwheel configuration. We're compiling into dev main cljs out. So when we look for this, it'll be in public cljs out dev main. JavaScript will be our single file that should have everything. So if we do tree again, we'll just see that one file. Hopefully, I think. I'm not sure if it builds all the things in order to be able to build that one file, or if it can just build that one file straight away. Okay. Let's see what we got. Oh, so it does create all those things there, yes. So it does still create all the individual files, but somewhere in this, oh yeah, so CLS out, I think it probably is at the bottom, yeah, dev main. So this is the single file it's generated, which basically combines all the other JavaScript files for us as well. So that's just doing, so it's using the dev build, but we're doing some white space optimization. And you can also do advanced, which will strip out any dead code as well. But white space or minify is sometimes enough as well. Only if you kind of really want to optimize it, you need advanced. It depends how many other libraries, JavaScript libraries, you're pulling in. If you're pulling in a lot of JavaScript libraries from even from clj.js, occasionally you might get a little bit of a problem. So sometimes you might just want to do like white space instead, or you can do simple, which just does I think it just basically basic minification. And the advanced one uses the Google Clojure with an S compiler, just to really make it a highly efficient ClojureScript program to run. And then what else is there in there? No, I think that's mainly it. So I'm not sure if I did do an example. Let's see, did I put that in here? I wonder where I put that. There is an example of, I created an alias using the output to thing in here. Where did I put? Let's see if I can find it. No, it's not there. That's a CLJS file. So there is figwheel-main put to, I think that is the, yeah, so we can set the, yeah, we can set the output directory to that using output output 2, and so we can, normally what I would have is a in here. So at the moment this is our top level of our project, and if I created a folder called docs, then I can configure GitHub pages to use that. Just use those files as the source of my GitHub docs. So I would copy in from resources public, and I just copy everything from there. That's all the sources. So that's all the HTML and CSS code that go in there. So you see that, well, there's a lot of stuff there. So yeah, so basically copy the CSS style, the index, and the test pages. But I can manually copy the dev main JS in there as well, and then just commit that and push it up, and it would serve all those things. Or I can set. I think what I did was create a. Yeah, let's see if I remember how to do this. Where is the? Yeah, so if I open the dev. Oops, that's not what I wanted. Open the dev build. So what I did was essentially just copy this. I'm going to copy the file and call it deploy .clj.eden. Enter that, and then I can use output 2. So I don't need auto testing on because I just want to output to something. So let's change that to output 2, and then I think we can just put docs there. And so that's basically now deploy.clj there. So if I create a tab in here, sorry, if we go back to the original deps.eden file, and if I duplicate this, so create another min file, but I'm going to call it deploy. And then the only thing I'm going to change is, rather than using the dev profile, I'm going to use the deploy. So that will pick up the deploy, and it should build into the docs file rather than the output, the target directory. So if I've got that right, then let's see. So let's do. I think it still generate all the files for us. I'm just going to clean them up for now. So I want basically this docs to have the dev main JS file in there when I do. So I can do Clojure -a. And let's do the fig, and then this time I want the deploy alias. So that'll do build. It will do a it'll do a build. It'll do the advanced compilation, so it will take a little bit longer. And it's going to use this deploy thing, so it will hopefully go and output it to the docs folder rather than anywhere else. I'm just wondering if I have to actually put, no, I think it should be alright. I don't think I have to put that into a vector. So fingers crossed that all works. If not, I'll add some notes. I'll add all these notes to the blog post as I get on there. Oh, whoops! What did I do? It doesn't like output 2. It is something like that somewhere. Oh, was it somewhere? I think that might be at a different level. That's all I need to do. Oh yes, sorry, yes. I think if I delete that, I think it just needs to go in its own map. Oops. I do have a working example of this somewhere, but I think it's on my other machine. Let's see, so try it again. I did save that file, didn't I? Oops. Tab. Oops. Good. New breakfast. So while that's building, there is a question: can we use SCSS and I assume also less with figwheel? I haven't tried, so like something that like a preprocessor for your CSS. I haven't tried that, but I'm pretty sure there is a way to do that, and it's just including it in the chain. And I think especially with figwheel-main, there should be a way to do that as well. I'd have to Google that, but if I do find it, I'll put some notes on to the file, and maybe we'll cover that in a different video as well. Like going to let's see, while it's waiting, we'll just do a quick Google, see if we can find something. Main yeah, so there's a question on there on also with SAS. SCSS or SASS? Do you mean the source? What do you mean by SCSS? You might need to clarify whether it's the kind of ClojureScript, whether it's the cascading style sheets building. I think that's what you mean. Okay, let's see what it's doing. Oh, it worked. No. It kind of built, but it's ignored that. So did it? Oh, yeah. So it doesn't seem to like the output 2 somewhere, but I did do. I'll put some notes in that when I find the. I'll put it into the blog post when I see that as well. But you can again create a whole range of different builds very easily. Again, they're just all Clojure maps that get pulled into the overall Depth Eden configuration. And so it's very easy to separate out and do very specific builds in when you're using Clojure CLI tools as well. So again, it's another reason to start thinking about moving over to Clojure CLI. You've got the flexibility from pulling in different different libraries from version control systems, like from GitHub, as well as from Maven and Clojure. So you've got flexibility in where you get your libraries from, and you've got a lot of flexibility in where you create the builds from as well. Oh yeah, and so it's very easy to tailor very quickly just by defining like data structures that represent the kind of builds that you want. It's very easy to build and construct and configure the a very specific set of workflows. So I hope you found this useful, and there's a lot more kind of examples we can go through over the coming days and weeks as we get through the so we'll look through a bigger example. Hopefully I'll get more time this week to work through a proper example and show you different builds, and I'll show you like a working version of the deploy that I use for GitHub as well. Just a question from the audience. Yeah, SAS and SCSS is the same, just slightly different syntax. Yeah, I think I'll have a Google, see if I can find anything about compiling. So as normal CSS, if you just have it in a CSS file, should work just fine. You might need to add something specific if you need like a preprocessor to compile your CSS, to compile the CSS. Then you might need to add that in somewhere into the tool chain, and it might be just another alias you include, or it might be just a figwheel option as well. There's one thing we didn't cover, I guess, is there is also the figwheel-main thing as well. So you can set some general figwheel configurations as well in here, and you can also set figwheel to build. So when you get errors in figwheel, you can actually just click on the error and it'll open the relevant file up in your editor as well. Okay, well, that's all I've got for today. So thank you very much for joining me, and I'll finish off that blog post with the deploy stuff in the next few hours. And yeah, thank you very much for joining me. If you've got any questions about Figwheel or ClojureScript and Clojure CLI tools, and let me know. And if there's anything particularly you want to see in the next broadcasts, then also very interested to see what people are interested in learning about, because it helps me learn as well. So thank you very much for joining, and see you next time. Thank you. Bye.